Meeting will please come to order. This is a special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. Tonight, as I said, this is a special meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Trustee Wolf.
Here.
Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Plunkett.
Here.
Trustee Dodd.
Here.
Trustee Kurzman.
Here.
Trustee Pierce.
Here.
President Belinsky.
Here. Okay, we're all here, so we obviously have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is item 2, which is appointment of Land Use Committee as a special zoning committee to review development regulations, including permitted and special uses in the PCD 1 zoning district, which is Eden's Plaza. So may I have a motion to make the appointment?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. There's a memo in the materials from Mr. Adler. We're not approving any changes to the zoning ordinance tonight. We're only appointing the Land Use Committee to review the current regulations, and then the committee will come back to the full board with a recommendation for action, if any. But that said, are there any questions for staff at this point in time? All right, and is there anyone here in the audience that'd like to be heard on this matter? Okay. So again, it's been moved and seconded. Clerk, please call the roll on the motion.
Trustee Wolf.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Pierce.
Aye.
President Belinsky.
Aye. As the motion carries, the Land Use Committee has been appointed. We'll move on to the heart of the meeting tonight, which is item 3, discussion of neighborhood storage project. Who's going to take it? Ms. Berger?
I can do a quick introduction. Thank you, President Belinsky. There are 2 items being discussed under this agenda item tonight. The first is a decision on the first location for underground storage at either Centennial Park or Community Playfield. So staff is looking for a direction on that decision. The second part of the agenda will focus on optimization. Optimization was requested by the village board back in April of last year when they determined that neighborhood storage was the preferred alternative. And what this concept does is the engineering firm of Christopher Burke Engineering went back and did a detailed analysis of neighborhood storage and looked at ways to take the properties that were still vulnerable to flooding in a 10-year storm and determined how to protect those properties, of course, for some additional cost. But the presentation tonight will share those results with everybody. So Mr. Olson from Chris Burke Engineering will walk us through a PowerPoint presentation.
Great. Welcome to a familiar face.
Yes, great to be here.
Engineers. What could be more fun than that, right?
On a Monday night. So thank you. Yes, as Bridget had indicated, this meeting is really divided into 2 meetings. One talking about community and Centennial, and then the second one talking about the optimization. Generally, the outline today, we're going to discuss real briefly some of the intergovernmental cooperation between the village and the Park District that's occurred. A brief background just to get everyone familiar with the neighborhood storage project. Again, it's been some time since we've discussed that here. Then we're going to get right into really a quick recap of the discussion of underground storage at Centennial versus community, because it's been talked about at several meetings now. And then really probably the lengthier discussion is going to be the results of the optimization of the different flood storage scenarios. And as Bridget had indicated, there are 2 real decision points tonight. The first one is direction on underground storage at Centennial Park versus community playfields. And then the second is feedback on prioritization of the optimized project scenarios that we're going to go through in detail tonight. So the cooperation, since we began in August of 2018, there's been a lot of cooperation between ourselves, the design team, the village, and the Park District. Any project that moves forward on Park District property is going to require an intergovernmental agreement between those 2 entities. To that end, we've been working with the Park District Executive Director, Park District staff, the Park District Board President, and communicating with them this project. We've been to 2 Park Board meetings to discuss the project, saw many of the same slides that you'll see tonight, particularly involving community versus Centennial. Those exact same slides were seen at the Park District meeting. We have also engaged an architect at the village's expense to talk about one of the future flood storage areas, which is Hibbard Park. The rec center, that area is potentially going to be the building may be expanded, so we're working with the architect to get footprints where we can put our flood storage in and not impact any future development of that area. And finally, there will be meetings that the park board will hold over the next coming months, and village staff and ourselves, Christopher Burke Engineering, and Baxter and Woodman will be attending those as necessary to provide any technical supports that is requested of us.
I'm going to interrupt and just add that President Wolf and I had lunch on Friday as well, and talked about the cooperative process between the Park District and the Village Board. So
Great. So as we begin to get into the meat of the presentation, we'll talk a bit about costs tonight. Those are going to be in 2018 dollars, and it will include engineering and 20% contingency. What those project costs do not include to date are any easements that would be required and any Park District amenities beyond just restoration of the ground on the Park District properties.
but restoration to current status quo is included.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So this is the base project. We've seen this before, but we'll just go over it very briefly. We've got the 3 different flood storage areas. On the very north side is Thornwood Park, which is titled Phase 3. On the far lower right is Phase 1, which in the current base project is shown as Centennial. As we get to the far south side, Hibbard Park has flood storage as well. Each of these flood storage areas has pink piping that's shown. Those are new storm sewers that are designed to, of course, bring the water into these underground flood storage areas. And finally, Phase 1A are a series of relief storm sewers that will tie into the main lines as pressure is reduced off those main trunk lines. We're pulling some more water in to provide flood benefit. So this is the base project. The updated engineer's estimate of cost is $53.8 million for this. Now, based on feedback that we have received over the past several months and even longer than that, there was a desire to do an evaluation of that underground at Centennial Park, and can it be moved to community playfield. And that was really completed as the very first step of our design in this process. So Centennial Park underground storage, and we'll go through these fairly quickly. There are some pros, some benefits of it. It's in the immediate vicinity of some of the residents that are flooding. We were able to align it so that there was no impact to the stormwater detention or the prairie that was located there. But there are some site constraints. We're really confined by the buildings to the south and the prairie to the north, and the ground there is much higher. So we're having to excavate down very deep to put this underground flood storage facility at the right elevation. And so between that, those constraints, it limits what we can do at Centennial and makes it a little bit more expensive. Again, it's the amount of ground that we're having to excavate out, nearly 16 feet of ground. We're having to excavate out, put that aside, put the tanks in, and then put the ground back on top. So a very limited workspace there. And really constrains us from even expanding it in the future, as we'll see here. So the first alternative we looked at was community playfield, and this you'll see 2 shapes there at community. We did in all of our presentations of the Park District show what the base design would be, which is what you see in red, and also what a larger future optimized size would be, which we'll talk about in the next part of this presentation. But these are the same slides that we're seeing for the Park District. There's a lot more open space at community, and we don't have as much overburden, so we're only digging down several feet, moving that dirt aside, putting these flood storage tanks down, and then putting the dirt back on. So from a construction perspective, from a space availability perspective, a much better alternative here. We do have the issue of access and how we're going to get the storm sewer to this site from the residents that flood. And so there'll be, in this scenario, an easement required for those properties on the north side of North Meadow Drive. The engineer's estimate of cost for this, just for this project and the storm sewers is slightly less than Centennial, and that's really reflective of the smaller amount of dirt that needs to be moved around. An alternative to this, in the event that an easement could not be obtained, would be to route a storm sewer to the west on Wilmette, to the north on Hunter, and into the flood storage facility that way. This has very similar benefits, as both of them do. We're benefiting the exact same people, providing the same level of flood protection. Here we just don't have to go through private property, but we have a longer storm sewer route, which leads to a higher cost. So what we did is we tried to make this as an objective of a decision as possible, and so we created a decision matrix. On the left-hand side are different categories of decisions that we were going to look at. We also had different criteria within each one of those. For instance, how large is the basin going to have to be? How easy is a storm sewer connection? Tree removal? A whole range. I believe there are approximately 20 different criteria that we use, broken up into these different categories. And where Centennial Park, which is the next column to the right, where that was a clear preferred location, we colored that green, where community, either 3-1 or 3-1A was selected, or was a preferred alternative. Those were colored green, and then we listed the pros and cons as well. And as you can see here very clearly, what jumps out is that community playfield alternative 1 was the most preferred option and the least expensive option as well. We also, at the request of the Municipal Services Committee, wanted to generate a map talking about the people that are benefited by both the storm sewers and the flood storage facility at this section of the project. And so the blue shading that you see is existing street flooding. So this is street flooding that would occur now during a 10-year event. And the yellow dots are vulnerable structures under existing conditions. So these would be vulnerable structures during a 10-year event under existing conditions. And so these are the streets and the properties that are benefited when we implement the project. And you can see here there is a large number of residents on Meadow that are benefited. That's one of the locations of some of the deepest street flooding is where Meadow turns into North Meadow, and a handful of residents there on Meadow also were vulnerable to structure flooding during a 10-year event under existing conditions, so that when we implement the project, and whether we implement it at Centennial or Community, the exact same residences and exact same streets are benefited, because it's merely just taking the storm sewer system and directing it either to a storage area at Community or a storage area at Centennial.
And in my recollection, I can't exactly pinpoint which of the meetings over the past 5 years I get this recollection from, but that the project, in all the sort of benefit analysis that we've done, you can't really separate the three. It's not like this portion just benefits this neighborhood and this portion just benefits this neighborhood, because you need sort of the upstream storage to keep the water from going downstream. So without Centennial or Community Playfields, the Hibbard project isn't as effective, and without Thornwood, neither of the two downstream projects are effective. I just want to make sure that this isn't just like, okay, this is who benefits from just this. They obviously get benefit because they're close, but you need everything for it to really work as well as we had hoped.
That's absolutely correct, because the whole system is connected, so you need all storage areas to provide the benefits. Yep, absolutely correct.
But can we ask questions now?
Yeah, sure, of course.
Yeah. So the residents that are benefited, that remains the same, whether, there's a couple of alternatives within Centennial, or Community Playfield, I should say. And the residents being benefited doesn't change, whether it's the easement or not the easement.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, all right.
Yes, please feel free if you've got a question to
Absolutely.
interrupt.
So we wanted to put together a summary of the comparisons between community and Centennial, and again, this is a duplicate of a slide that we've presented to the Park District and to the Municipal Services Committee. Community Playfield provides more cost-effective underground storage. Again, we have more space to work in. We don't have as much overburden. It also can be built larger. There's more open space there to potentially expand it, which is what we'll talk about in the next part of tonight's meeting. And it's also closer to some of the flooding locations that weren't originally helped out under the base project. It will also have less site impact. At Centennial, if we were to construct it at Centennial, that's really the last piece of open space that's there at Centennial, and it's sandwiched in between the prairie and the building, so more impact there long term. But there are some items we need to address with community, such as the construction window. We've got 2 schools that we're going to be working around, as well as an easement. And in both cases, there's going to be tree removal. But at community, there's also some drainage problems there. That in the last slide, we can also see that there's some blue area in community that we can help reduce that flooding as part of this project. If we're going to be doing large infrastructure projects, we can help alleviate some of that flooding that obviously affects the fields there, but also some of the residents that back up to the field. So there's really an opportunity for a win-win there with community.
So, I mean, just the Park District, this is the Park District's desire. To the extent we've heard from residents at all, it's been against the Centennial site and looking for an alternative. It's cheaper. Construction's going to be easier and less disruptive. You're really down to those last 3 items. You'll have to make your construction schedule work with the school schedules. You may need an easement. Well, you either need one from the schools or from a private property owner. And then you're going to remove trees in either place. There's no way around that. Correct. But there's an added benefit that you might be able to fix some of the drainage problem. I mean, are we missing anything? At first blush, this looks like a pretty simple, question that you're asking us to answer here.
That is correct, but we wanted to certainly go through the process.
No, of course, we need to lay it all out there. But I guess I'm wondering if I'm missing something.
I don't believe so.
Questions from?
So I have a question.
Sure.
So first of all, thank you for coming here and doing this in front of us.
My pleasure.
And I appreciate the discussion that you've had with the Park District, the staff as well as the board, and I appreciate, so it's great to hear that. Has there been any discussions with the school district, and do we see the school having any concerns with this? I'm just asking the question. I know this is not their property. I don't quite understand how this works, because do the schools own the property just that the schools are on? I guess I'm asking.
I can
So I'm
comment
asking a
on, so I sent to Dr. Lechner one of the slides that was shown in terms of community playfield impact. He presented it to his board, and they did not have any concerns.
Okay. So the school board then has heard this at least and is aware that obviously the park board is recommending we use this site, and
Yes, they're aware.
That's great. Okay.
That's a very good question.
The second question I have is one that I actually spoke to. You know what? I'll hold that for the optimization. I was going to
Okay.
ask the one about the locust, or I'll wait.
Other questions? Okay.
Actually, I have one quick one. You were talking about how looking at that map, like the square of where the retention basin would be, very much overlaps where there's flooding, but then there's a little flooding beyond that. How would you, and you're saying that flooding could be improved, how would that take place?
So we can provide under drains to some of those field areas. We can provide, do a little bit of regrading to collect that water into traditional storm sewer inlets and bring those areas either into our new storage facility or better connect them on to the way that they should be going or do go now.
Okay, so basically that area would be under construction anyway and probably excavated anyway, so you could fix all that while you're working on it.
That's correct. And we also have a desire, we want to make sure we use green infrastructure where available, so we'll be certainly in areas where we can, minor ponding can be addressed through green infrastructure. That's a big part of the project as well.
Yeah, that seems to me like it could actually be a really nice enhancement, given that it's near High Crest, an area where there are the soccer fields and
Absolutely.
everything, and that sounds good.
Absolutely.
So do we want to talk about this now? I mean, do you want us to have our discussion and sort of make a decision at this point? I mean, the way I was thinking about this, we would discuss public comments next on the agenda, and we're certainly eager to hear what people have to say tonight, and then we can sort of reopen our conversation to the extent that something that was said in public comment gives people pause or, you know, opens up another avenue of discussion. But this one seems easy to me. So if we can just sort of, you know, what do people think?
So have we heard any concerns from any residents about this? You know, we obviously heard concerns about Centennial Playfield and the prairie grass, but have we heard any concerns from any residents that you're aware of, Bridget, regarding moving it to this?
I spoke to one resident about some of the construction issues, but nothing that would change the opinion of this board moving forward, more logistical type questions.
And
Like, when will the trucks be there, and how long will it take, and, you know,
And-
that kind of stuff.
so I have one more question. How is this area just used in the summer? Like, what's the impact to the community? Because I'm looking at, like, Centennial Park and looking at your, the comparison of the view, it says kind of like Centennial Park, we can't do it in the summer months. Obviously, community playfields, we can only do it when school. Why can we only do it when school is out? Just because it's too disruptive to? So I'm just asking, kind of, just trying to understand the impact to this particular location when we do the actual, you know, when we implement it.
I think the desire would be to have most of the substantial construction complete when school is out, just because there's going to be an awful lot of trucks coming in, picking up, collecting the dirt that's excavated out of there and leaving the site, as well as, you know, concrete and other things that would come in that would be much preferred to occur over the summer when school's out.
I mean, I suspect there'd be quite a bit of noise. I mean, that's sort of unavoidable when you've got trucks rolling in and out.
Yep.
And the like.
But these schools do have summer school in session. Right. At this.
Highcrest?
Yeah, at High Crest they would. So I just was at that.
Well, I think, unless they would move it back. I'm not going to speak for the school board, but I do know they have various locations. I think sometimes they can change that. And I know that they have summer camps all summer long in those community play fields. So that would obviously have to be relocated. But, you know, I've seen where they do that.
Mm-hmm.
What is the construction timeline for the basin?
So
Or,
that.
you don't have, not, I mean, just from start to finish, roughly, how long does it take to build?
I think we had about 9 to 12 weeks would be the heavy construction. And again, that's really, really weather dependent. You know, if we got started and got 3 weeks of rain, that would push all that back. But I think that the heavy construction would be 9 to 12 weeks, and then restoration could occur after that.
And would that be roughly regardless of the basin size?
As the basin got bigger, that would get longer because more dirt needs to be removed out and more pieces of the underground storage need to be moved in. So that could, we've looked at some rough estimates of going from 9 to 12 weeks to maybe 12 to 16 weeks.
I just want to make it clear that the 9 to 12 weeks, as Darren said, is a very perfect scenario, and I'm quite confident we're going to have some overlap with the school either before or after construction season. So that's where proper planning, writing the contract documents tight so that we're minimizing any of those conflicts with the school, coordination with the school and the park district, all that will come into play. But we want to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, like everything else.
When I look at the design, and, the pink sewer lines that are going in, so the basin gets built, and then for this phase, how much longer to sort of complete this phase?
That would get all constructed at the same time. So this storm sewer And the basin, I mean, it's one project. This is phase one. So we would look to construct them at the same time. Now, that's not to say that we would want construction going on at the school property and then south of the homes on North Meadow at the same time. But again, as Bridget indicated, as we get further along into the construction documents, we could write in there exactly when things had to be constructed and timelines.
Is the bulk of the expense of the $12 to $17 million, is it the basin?
It is. I believe the sewer there is a couple $1 million, but the bulk of it is the basin.
There's obviously some incremental cost if you run this. I mean, if you don't use the easement, that incremental cost has been quantified, which is not insignificant, though, right?
It's a $5 million difference, is what you said.
That's correct.
It goes from 12 to 17.
Yeah.
I'm just asking if of the 12 to 17 million, is 80% the basin?
That's
That's what you basically
yes.
said.
Yep.
Yeah.
Other questions? So, I guess I mean, we're not taking a formal vote, but I guess I'll go around and just straw vote. I mean, Trustee Wolf?
I think this sounds like a great solution. Yeah.
Trustee Sullivan?
Well, we talked about it. They did a nice job presenting to the municipal services and agree.
Trustee Plunker?
I agree as well.
Trustee Dodd?
Yep, I agree, so thank you for bringing this.
Trustee Kurzman?
Agree.
Trustee Pierce?
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, this one seemed like a pretty easy one, like cheaper, better, everybody wants it that way. I mean, if all of our projects were like that, this job would be a lot easier, right?
So would you like me to continue on to the next part?
Yes, there is a blank page here on purpose, right?
Yes, this
the
was
one
kind of
that's
a
up on the
stopping
screen?
point.
Okay, all right.
Yep. So the next topic is optimization, and really what this quote here is exactly what we were trying to do is, what is the most cost-effective way to implement this project to help the most number of residents now and into the future? So we, even back in 2015 when we first talked about Alternative 3, we were all aware that it does not help and provide 10-year level of protection to every resident on the west side. And so what this analysis looked at was, can we refine our analysis and optimize it so that we can try to help as many people as we can. And we started with, again, the base project, but as you see, I've now shown community playfield as phase one. And that's the base cost goes down, assuming the easement is obtained, to $52.4 million to reflect the decrease of going from Centennial to community. And so what we did at this point was we dug back into the flooding analysis and to the modeling to take it from at places a macro scale down to really a micro scale. And we began to look at elevations of every structure. We're getting survey data of some of these areas coming in. And we really refined that analysis and looked at exactly who remained vulnerable after implementation of the base project. And what we see on the map here is we see the base project implemented, although it does show it at Centennial rather than community. But this is the base project that is implemented. And we compared then with this refined analysis, we compared the flood elevations at certain locations in the street to those areas that where flooding still occurred, to the lowest adjacent grades of the structures, the residential structures that were there in the same format that was done previously by Stantec. And what we were able to do is we were able to identify clusters of areas that were still had structures that were vulnerable to flooding in the 10-year event. And then these areas were the areas that we began to look at as part of this optimization. Can we also provide relief to these clusters of residents? So this is really the basis of how we began to move forward with the optimization.
Can I ask a question on that? So, this is something I spoke to Bridget about, but I would like you to help explain it to me again. So, in looking at this, which shows the vulnerable structures after the base project, can you explain to me this particular diagram is different than this Stantec diagram that we used, in April to make our decision about what to do? Because in that particular diagram, there was vulnerable structures that we weren't touching. That was kind of near Lake and Locust, as well as kind of near the Hibbert area. And so I would like to. So I'm comparing, and I don't know if this is fair or not, Darren, and I apologize. I'm kind of comparing the Stantec model and how they were doing their analysis around vulnerable structures, and to this model. And if you could just explain how that's different, so that we make sure that some of the residents that were in some of those areas that they felt like weren't going to be addressed, they're not even seeing themselves circled on this new diagram. Does that make sense, my question?
No, it does. It's a great question. Really, the main difference is just the level of detail that our original study and the Stantec study. There were portions of those studies that were more at a macro level, and what we did is, especially in these areas where we knew that there was some additional structures that were vulnerable, we really brought it down to a micro level in addressing some of those areas. And so the model changed slightly because of that, really the added level of detail that was put in. We did look at, in the Stantec diagram that I believe you're referencing, looks at more at street flooding. It shows large areas of blue for street flooding. And we did specifically look at those areas to make sure that they were indeed addressed when we completed our analysis of the base project. And indeed, yes, those were addressed as part of that analysis.
Okay.
So it's the level of detail that we went into that kind of drives the slight differences. The actual numbers are very, very similar. It's just the locations of a few of those structures have transferred between the two studies.
Okay. So, for example, there was a fair amount of flooding at the Locust kind of lake area in this. Well, street flooding in the Stantec model, and based on your further refinement, there isn't as much there. Because the other things that are going to happen are going to resolve that.
Correct.
It's not that there's not flooding now. It's to kind of President Belinsky's point earlier, which is once you start to remove some of the water in these other isolated areas, it provides an opportunity for those other areas to actually go into the storm sewers.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yep. So we moved forward in looking at these targeted areas, and what we did is we developed 4 optimization scenarios, and these are scenarios that we would add on to the base project to provide additional flood protection during the 10-year event. So scenario 1, which is located south of Wilmette, is to run some additional larger diameter storm sewers north on Ramona and Beverly to tie into the trunk system on Wilmette. What we found was that, again, this concept of providing relief, the storage basins provide relief for the trunk system, so there's a little bit of capacity still left in there, and we were able to bring this additional water into the trunk system. That did not require any additional storage above and beyond the base alternative.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying there. I think I do. It wouldn't make sense if the trunk was full. It wouldn't make sense to add these sewers and add the ability for the water to get into the trunk, because it wouldn't go anywhere anyways.
Absolutely correct.
But since the trunk is less full because of the storage or the other relief sewers, now it actually makes sense to add a couple of sewers to drain areas more quickly because there's capacity.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely correct.
I didn't appreciate that until you said it, but I wanted to re-say it to make sure I understood it. Okay.
And these alternatives that you're showing us, they don't matter with respect to the alternatives that we would pursue at the community playfield, whether or not you're having an easement or you're going down and around. It doesn't
Correct.
matter.
It doesn't matter. So scenario one is the only one that does not require some additional flood storage to relieve the trunk lines. The remaining three do. Scenario two is a storm sewer that's on Hibbard, south of Lake Street. We'd be pulling more water from Washington and Hibbard into the Lake Street system. In order to offset that, or in order to make sure there's capacity in there, we had to provide a slightly additional amount of flood storage to the Thornwood Basin, because the Thornwood Basin is the one that's connected to the Lake Street system. So we're providing a little bit of extra storage there to relieve the system. And that's only half an acre foot of additional storage in the Thornwood Basin, which is the TH after that storage.
So on this one, I mean, and Trustee Dodd, I think this is one of those blue areas from the old chart, from the Stantec chart or at least one of the Stantec charts that you were referring to, was sort of all right over here at Hibbard and Washington and a little further south.
And by the same token, the area number 2 is that Lake and Locust area that showed up on the other ones.
And I will also note that the work that's being done on Locust, that upcoming project has been upsized to provide some additional relief as well.
So you-
Could you follow up on that? In other words, what we're about to do at Locust, this does not impact. It's not impacted by what we're about to do.
What we've done is we have modified the plans for Locust, so we've increased the storm sewer there to take advantage of this upcoming project.
Okay, thank you.
So in a sense, I think we should be showing to some degree a larger relief sewer on Locust, because that's what we're doing. Even though it's not part of this stormwater project, it's part of the Locust project, and it is part of it is part of our broader stormwater project, and I think it's helpful for residents to see that.
It's a good idea.
Because it's providing relief.
Yep.
Not, like I said, it is, maybe it's not part of this particular, but it is part of this project.
It's being funded separate from
Being
the funding
funded
for this,
separately,
but it's part
but
of the
it's-
broader,
Yes.
the stormwater relief is stormwater relief.
And taking place at a different time.
Right.
And taking place at a different time.
Yeah.
Now, just, you mentioned number 2, it relies on extra capacity at Thornwood. So it looks like some of these, as you go, they're dependent on doing something else first. So you wouldn't do the 2 unless you did increase the capacity at Thornwood.
Absolutely.
And so then there's obviously an order to all of these, not necessarily as they're numbered.
That's correct. Generally, there are storm sewers that are tied to flood storage areas. And to what we've discussed here is that without the flood storage areas, these storm sewers have very little benefit. They rely solely on the flood storage areas relieving the trunk line so we can get the water in there.
So but the project built, I don't want to say on the other side of town, it's not that far away, but materially far away at Thornwood Park is helping Hibbard in this, helping allow for this additional relief to the Hibbard neighborhood to take place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Would you necessarily need to do these extra storm sewers after the basins, or could you build them and just they wouldn't provide that much relief until you did increase the basins?
That you could do it that way as well. Yes, you could build the storm sewers first, and then the basins. The storm sewers just would not have the benefit until the basins were online.
Okay, well, just in case there were road projects that needed to be tied to
Yep.
some of these.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's a
Right,
great
because it
question.
probably makes sense to do them, whether the road's done before or after the basin. It makes sense to do all this stuff when the road's ripped up. Right.
Scenario 3 and 4 get into some of the larger additional flood storage. Scenario 3 is taking providing relief to the area west of Illinois in the Washington and Hunter area. This was one of the areas that we knew was not served as part of the base project. We were able to bring this area in, and again, this is one of the locations where, because if we were to do it at community, that makes scenario 3 less expensive because we're not having as much storm sewer. We can bring it into the basin here, but we do need to upsize this basin fairly significantly. We need to add 6.6 acre-feet of additional storage to community playfield, to that basin, which it was previously 12 acre-feet. Scenario 4, similar. It's south of Lake Street. Near Birchwood, we'd be bringing water in to the lake trunk system, and in order to have room in there, we're providing additional storage at Thornwood, and that's 2.9 acre-feet of storage.
And was part of the analysis, the additional detail, sort of understanding what you had at each of the storage locations to know whether you actually could? I mean, at this point, do you know that you can actually locate, 18.6 acre-feet under community and whatever, 13.9 feet under Thornwood?
Yes, so we now are working with detailed survey of the parks, detailed aerials that were collected. We've got soil samples, so we have an awful lot more data in the last 3 months than we've had in the concept stage,
Right.
which we were doing before this.
Right. And you had mentioned that on community playfields, we could improve the drainage. I've heard from residents around Thornwood Park that, if it rains, you can't play baseball for, a week. Are those also the kind of improvements that can be made both at Hibbard Park and at Thornwood Park?
Absolutely. So, ourselves and Baxter and Woodman have done a lot of similar projects, and in all of those, we've been able to get win-wins by improving drainage in areas. Yeah.
It's usually a cost to wins.
That is
but,
correct. That's correct.
But it's still, a win-win is good. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll move on to the next slide, which really provides an optimization summary. And so on the left column, we've got the different projects, the base all the way down to the different scenarios, the different costs. Again, the base is assuming that we're at community, and so the different incremental costs for the scenarios as well. The vulnerable structures protected, the cost per structure, and the storage required. And I'll go back to the vulnerable structures protected. Both our analysis and Stantec had for the 10-year event approximately 310 vulnerable structures. By the base project, we're able to bring that down to 220, which is about a 71% reduction. As we continue to chip away of those with the different scenarios, by the time we get to the very end, we're at approximately 305 out of the 310 structures that were vulnerable for the 10-year event. We're able to provide flood relief for those to make them no longer vulnerable. The costs that we see in the second column from the left don't include, again, things like easements, additional park district amenities, additional park district drainage improvements, but they total up to what we would call the optimized total of $68.2 million. We also wanted to take a step back and look at this with respect to really where we've been and the different projects that have come forward. The original Seabell alternative number 1, which we know as the relief sewer project, that ranged from $82 to $98 million and protected 295 of the 310 structures for the reduction of 95%. Stantec Alternative 2, which was a kind of a hybrid of some storage and relief sewers, a cost of $72.2 to $82.5, 81% of reduction of vulnerable structures. The base alternative for $52.4 million, 71% reduction in vulnerable structures, and again, this is all for the 10-year event. And then we get to the optimized, as we were able to really get into the weeds, get down to a micro level. We were able to, for $68.2 million, reduce that reduce 305 vulnerable structures for a rate of 98% of those vulnerable structures removed for the 10-year event.
So when a decision is made with respect to community playfield, before that's final, a decision has to be made as to this option number 3. Is that correct, scenario 3? Because that
The
drives
size, yeah.
the size.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be substantially more expensive to construct the amount of storage needed for scenario 3 at community because we're constrained. We'd have to.
So it's logical.
No, I'm sorry, you meant at Centennial.
I'm
You
sorry,
couldn't do it at
Centennial.
Centennial.
Sorry,
You could do it
Centennial.
at Community.
Yes.
So you really have to make that decision before you decide as to what to do at the community.
Yes.
In terms of the size.
And the metric that's used here is structures, vulnerable structures, but it's rational, and I'm just sort of stating the obvious, that all the other metrics that we've looked at in terms of depth of water and time that the water's there and everything else improves along with that because you've got more storage capacity, you've got more room in the trunk lines, and therefore more water can get off the street into the trunk lines or into the storage. as a
Correct.
result.
In all the areas where we're helping vulnerable structures or removing them from being vulnerable structures, we also have the pavement dry in the 10-year event. So we're able to get the hydraulic grade line of that sewer system down below the pavement for a 10-year event in those areas.
That's what, yeah, I wanted to follow up on that because we spent a lot of time when we had the last reviews, not just talking about the structures, but talking about the street flooding, the parkway flooding, the lawn flooding, the school buses getting through, fire trucks getting through. So with this optimization, is there any part that we've talked about the structures, but of the street flooding and the parkway flooding and all of that, is there anything that we've left out, or can we?
So there is some remnant street flooding left of shallow depth. And I think our memo talked about that this optimized scenario when the village were to, say, reconstruct some of those streets, they could upsize those storm sewers and the storage would be here for that. But these optimized scenarios 1 through 4 were specifically targeted to reduce the vulnerable structure. And where they do that, they also provide a dry street during the 10-year event.
Right, because if the water's up to the structure, it's well over.
Exactly.
The street is seriously flooded at that point.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
But wait, let me make sure I understood what you're saying. I think what you're saying is basically, it's not just that this takes it down 6 inches. The fact that the incremental things are in there, you're making a huge difference where the vulnerable structures are.
Correct. We're not just taking the water from where it would, in existing conditions where it's impacting the structure, down just below that. We're taking it all the way down to the street level
Right, okay.
in these areas where we're doing the storm sewer improvements.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was actually looking at something, so I might have lost that last. Can you say that one more? It was my fault. I was thinking about something else.
Sure.
But I mean, are we reducing all the flooding on the streets as well through this optimization?
At these locations, we are. There is still some remnant street flooding of shallow depth in certain locations here. And what we've done is we've provided the storage so that in the event that the village were to repave those streets or reconstruct those streets, they could, and we have a map showing where those are at, they could tie those storm sewers, larger storm sewers in and not need any additional storage. But these scenarios were designed specifically to address vulnerable structures.
Okay.
What about the green infrastructure that's to be an integral part of this? Any ideas where that might go? What impact that might have on all of this?
Absolutely. So I think the location that will be great for green infrastructure will be some of these park settings that we talked about. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there to provide green infrastructure. Baxter and Woodman has worked on projects where they actually do some irrigation. They recycle some of the stormwater and do irrigation using the stormwater, which is a great reuse of the water. Other rain gardens, other amenities could certainly be added in quite easily in the parks. When we get to the right-of-way corridors, there certainly are some opportunities, but again, we're limited by the width that we're dealing with, any trees. So if we were going to do some rain gardens and stuff, we'd have to make sure it was an area that we wouldn't have to take down any trees. But we are specifically, as part of our design for the Phase 1, which is some of these initial storm sewer improvements, we're looking at where we can incorporate green infrastructure within the village right away.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm sorry, I have another question.
Sure.
Can you clarify for me on this particular diagram for scenario 4, why for scenario 4 you're sending the water to Thornwood Park as opposed to sending the water to community playfields? Because that actually seems that seems just as close, if not closer, and then we could eliminate the cost of expanding the Thornwood Park reservoir.
That's a great question. And what doesn't show up on this map is that the water from Area 4 right now naturally drains towards the Lake Avenue storm sewer. So we want to make sure that as we're doing these projects, we're also honoring some of these mini watershed divides within the village, so that we're not taking water from one side of the village and taking it over somewhere else and inadvertently causing an issue there. So right now that water on Birchwood, that section of Birchwood actually does now drain north to Lake Avenue. And fortunately, we don't have to take it all the way north to Thornwood. We're able to expand Thornwood and take pressure off of the Lake Avenue system, so this water can have room to drain into the Lake Avenue system. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's a great question. So we also wanted to look at the concept of future-proofing the base project. And what future-proofing is it would be to construct the larger storage now under current design contracts and construct that storage all at once with the ability then to put the storm sewer systems in for the different design scenarios in the future when maybe they would be more cost-effective as part of an adjacent village project. And so what we looked at was, if you were going to construct a future-proofed version so that you would not have to get back into the parks and add more storage, what would the cost of that be? And again, what that was really doing was just taking the costs for each one of the scenarios and breaking them up into a storm sewer cost and a storage cost, and then totaling down the storage cost and adding that to the base to get the future-proofed cost. And so we see for scenario 1, there was no storage involved with that above and beyond the base. And then as we go to scenarios 2, 3, 4, and 5, what we're seeing there is our estimate of cost for the storage that we're then totaling down and coming up with the future-proofed version.
Because basically, you can decide not to build the sewer this year, but you can't go back and make the community playfields storage facility bigger.
We would not recommend that. You wouldn't want to do that.
I guess you could, right?
Anything's possible, but not recommended.
So this is the portion of the project that relates to the storage facility, and to Trustee Pierce's point, this is what you got to decide now. You're either doing this or you're not. You could decide later on a storm sewer, but the storage stuff has to be figured out before we do the designs, let the contracts, and all the rest of that stuff.
Absolutely, yes.
Could you review for us, and we may not have gotten to this yet, how the design engineering will take place? In other words, the first phase would be to do the underground storage at community playfields, and we could upsize that and decide later whether or not to upsize Thornwood, because that would get designed a little bit later. Is that correct?
So right now, we are, under our contract, we're doing 30% design and full design of community playfield. We're also completing 30% design of the Thornwood Basin and those associated storm sewers, as well as 30% design of the Hibbard Park.
So it really is advantageous to make a decision on the whole thing
It
before
really
you
is,
get going
yes.
with that?
Yes.
Okay.
And I assume even without the additional storm sewers, performance of the system's enhanced by adding more storage. I mean, that's sort of like logical, right? You have more
is correct.
storage, it's better.
That is correct. Yes. So we also wanted to lay out a potential timeline for the project. And this would be, we're just going through years 1, 2, 3, and 4. What you see there on the top is the Phase 1A storm sewers that we've currently completed final design. I'm sorry, we've completed 30% design of those. And so that portion is moving forward. Again, those storm sewers won't have their benefit until the storage is online. And then as we go down towards the bottom, we total up, per year how much, what the expenditure would be given if we're constructing just the base project, or if we're constructing the future-proofed, or if you're constructing the storm sewers that are part of the optimized. So in year 1, we're just looking at the Phase 1A storm sewers for $6.4 million. In year 2, we would have the ability to construct the Phase 1A storage and storm sewers for $12.5. And then if we were going to construct the optimized basin, that would increase the cost for the basin to $5.2. We've also listed in that year the Phase 3 storm sewers, because those, that's the Scenario 3 storm sewers. Again, those are the ones on the east side of Illinois that would be draining into the community basins. So it would be logical, if you wanted to construct those storm sewers early, to construct them at the same time. Year 3 really centers around Hibbard and some of the storm sewers. That's the Phase 1 storm sewers that are probably most reliant on the storage at Hibbard. And then year 4 is up at Thornwood, where we would construct that basin. We could optimize or future-proof it for an extra $2.6 million, and then construct those storm sewers that are tying into the Lake Avenue system, so that they're providing the benefit when they're constructed. Now, these storm sewers could be constructed, the optimized storm sewers could be constructed at any time. We could construct them as part of these projects. They could be bid as alternates. There are a lot of options, and really be up to the village to decide how they wanted to construct those optimized storm sewers. We also have some financial projections that were prepared by village staff. Going into the project costs, the estimated annual debt service, and the estimated median sewer bill impact for the base project, the cost to expand the basins, which would be part of that future-proofed, the additional storm sewers as part of the full optimization, and then getting to the total of $68.2 million, which is the full optimization. So with that, we wrap up the optimization discussion, but happy to take any questions that you may have.
Well, first we'll have questions from Mr. Olson, but then just, I'll sort of ask people for their reaction, talk about it here a little bit. Trustee Plunkett.
Well, first, this is great news. This is really exciting, and I think most people would agree with that. We were hoping that there would be optimization for this, and so this is probably better than we could have hoped for. So I think it's fantastic. I had one specific question that I'm not sure who should go for this, but when the cost of the additional storm sewers, when we talk about tying them to road projects, is there savings in that number? Or is that pretty much what it costs to do it, regardless of whether or not it's tied to a road project?
There's a little bit more savings when you're tying it to a cost of a road project because you don't have to build the patch, basically patch the road because you're reconstructing or resurfacing the whole road. So you could see some savings if it's done as part of a project. Some of these roads, they're also in varying degree of condition. So you may want to wait until the pavement condition gets to a point that we would already, want to resurface, then put a patch down a brand new or recently resurfaced road.
I guess maybe we talk about it in two. I mean, obviously there are questions. People can ask questions too, but start with future proofing. I think when we chose this option, one of the things that we asked the engineers to do was how can we make this sort of plug and play where we're not making a decision that's short-sighted, and then we're like, oh gosh, if we were really thinking, we would have made it a little bit bigger. It seems like this is the little bit bigger that we sort of asked for. So first, from a future-proofing point of view, does anybody have a concern about building, spending the extra? The future-proofing is $8 million, right? 7.8?
Correct.
With spending an additional $8 million to make the basins bigger, make the reservoirs, the storage facilities bigger. We don't have to.
To your question, you said, does anybody have a concern of spending $8 million more? Yes, I have concerns, but I'm supportive of, I think we would be remiss and short-sighted if we don't expand these to as much capacity as possible. So I think it's worth going into eyes wide open. It is going to cost us more. It's $300 more on our sewer and water bill, which I'm curious on what that sort of would equate to on a rate, whether our water and sewer rate's going to go up to. But again, I think we'd be short-sighted, and I think we talked about it when we have been talking about this for a couple of years, this part of Wilmette, 5 years. It's been developed, so this our growth has outpaced the size of this system, so, why would we try to minimize this? So
It seems like if you're spending $50 million and you can spend 58 and get like something that you really is a better answer. Obviously you could spend a lot more money, but this is a proposal that gets us a pretty reasonable cost for the sort of the performance that we were looking at on some of the bigger systems.
Well, and I think again, what we were saying, this wasn't going to be a quick fix anyways. We know this is going to be a long-term project, and it's going to be continual. So, again, I would think we should try to expand as much as possible. So,
Others?
Yeah, I would agree with what Trustee Sullivan says. I think we would be remiss in not expanding this. This is what we asked for, to look at optimization. I would say we shouldn't overlook, though, that it's $8 million more. And so for me, it doesn't change that, yes, we need to do this. For me, the question will be timing, because we are spending $8 million more than what we committed to when we talked about it in April. And so maybe that means we just can't go quite as aggressively or not. I'm not sure the answer there, but we do have a lot of unanswered financial issues in front of us that I just wouldn't want us to overlook.
Yeah, this is the section, this is the part that we sort of got to decide before we design.
We don't have to decide. We just have to decide if we're going to do it. We don't have to decide the timing of when we're going to do it.
That's right.
So in my mind, those are different.
Yeah, but I think, I agree with what you're saying, but I think what we said to the community was this was the shorter term project. This is the project we get done faster than the conveyance project, which would likely have taken longer. So, but the first question, every year we'll decide what gets built. A new village board every year will decide what gets built in the following year through our normal capital process.
And if I may, the way I look at it is, if we had done the all conveyance project, we'd be looking at tearing up basically every street in West Wilmette for a couple years. And with this, if we do decide to go with this optimized plan and the future-proofed, we'd be committing to, yes, we're going to do it And it looks like I'm seeing us leaning toward doing phase one sooner rather than later. But if there were a reason that then it would be designed, if there were a reason that we decided to delay a year or two on the others, we could do that.
Right. I mean, I don't expect the next recession to be as bad as the last recession, but you could have, a big hit and, residents could, say, look, maybe we need to skip a year on this project or something like that. That's possible. Sure.
Yeah, I don't think I totally, Trustee Wolf asked you this question, and I don't know that I totally understood the answer, which was why tonight we couldn't decide to proceed with just the community playfield expansion and wait on the decision on the Thornwood expansion, because the Thornwood expansion is 3 years out. I know you answered that. That was one of Trustee Wolf's kind of questions, but I'm not sure I understood why we couldn't just decide just on the community playfield expansion tonight, since that's the one that's most that's the one in front of us.
Mm-hmm. I suppose that decision could be made later. We are in the process of doing a 30% design of Thornwood. So if we were going to move forward with that design, we would need to know if we're going to be designing it for what size.
So you have to basically have a 30% design of the whole system before you can really start on any one part. Is that an accurate
Yes.
thing to say?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Trustee Kurzman?
I think this is a landmark occasion tonight, because what it does for us is it puts us within grasp the aspiration of 10-year flood protection for all residents. And just a few months ago, we didn't think that was possible. On occasions like this, I bring my favorite memento, which is the meeting agenda from January 24th, 2008, which was my first stormwater meeting in the village. We've just passed the 11-year mark since that time. And we have this chance now where we didn't have just a couple weeks ago to see that all residents, not just some, but all residents get elevated to not being substandard. And I just think that some fantastic work has gone into it by village staff, by our outside contractors. We're hearing some excellent questions from trustees, and I just think that the pieces are falling into place to getting it done well. And I'm excited by the possibility, and that comes from somebody who didn't vote for option 3. I've had to pivot and go from advocating for option 1 into being a supporter of the village and the excellent work that I've just described to make option 3 almost as good, and to have done so cost-effective way. So when I look at this, I see opportunity. I think the future proofing makes all the sense in the world. Let's do it once, let's do it right, and then to the plug and play option, it leaves us open for the future.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Trustee Kurzman and Trustee Plunkett said. I was thrilled when I got this news, that the engineers have figured out a way to make this project really, effective and at an incremental cost that was in the range of what people could swallow. Obviously, if the incremental cost was $50 million, well, we're at the other project. So, other thoughts?
I just want to say I agree with that, too. I mean, we knew this was a big project when we started looking at it, and it is. But I think the engineering has been so helpful, and it's very good news. And just, for me, I'm kind of an engineering-oriented person. Seeing the details just makes it all make sense, and it makes it seem like a real project. So I'm very pleased with the way things are looking at this point.
Trustee Pierce?
Yeah, I mean, this looks great to me. I kind of came in as this engine was already rolling. We know that we have financial challenges on the horizon aside from this, and is the this $300 a year number, that's what we estimate the impact being to residents, is that additional cost?
Well,
I
it's
wonder-
it's $230 if we don't future-proof it. It's
Right.
an incremental $70
Whatever
if you
those-
did all of the optimization.
Okay, all
So we've already sort of said 230, and this is another 70 if you go all the way. And it doesn't, the 30 has to sort of be done, the 35, the first 35 sort of has to be done up front. The other 35 can phase in as time
And
goes, right?
and that's for the term of,
30 years.
Okay.
If I could add,
Yeah.
this is based on the median sewer bill. So we're doing a stormwater utility study now, which would be a different way to fund the debt service. So that could change these numbers a little bit, depending on the type of water user somebody may be now, the type of impervious surface they may have. But that's a presentation that's going to be coming later this spring or early summer. So that, the community should see these numbers as a ballpark, but not really how the final numbers will shake out based on how we fund it, how the debt service works out in the final bids.
yeah,
But it is an average.
But it's an average.
It's an average,
Yes.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. All right, so, I mean, it sounds to me like and let me just, again, put it into context. We do have to make a decision on the size of the basins. We don't have to make a decision on how fast the additional storm sewers are built. They shouldn't be built any faster than the basins that they run into are constructed, because they won't be effective.
Correct.
Unless, of course, there's a road or something. If there's a reason, you might do that. But we have to make a call on the basins because you guys have to do the design. We have to make a call on whether we're going to future-proof it. The basins have to be figured out in this design. You'll probably design in the storm sewers as well, but you don't have to build those until you want to, in essence.
Correct.
And so let's start with the future-proofing. And again, we're not voting to approve anything really, but I'd like to just have everybody, say if they support the future-proofing or not. Trustee Wolf, future-proofing?
Yeah, I think it makes sense.
Dan, Trustee Sullivan? Trustee Plunkett?
Yeah, definitely.
Trustee Dodd?
Yes.
Trustee Kurzman?
Yes.
Yes.
Trustee Swisher? Okay, so I think we've got unanimity here that we want to future-proof. And again, is there any decision that we have to make tonight on the additional sewers?
The only other thing that we could talk about as an option is to incorporate the design of all the sewers with each of the phases, so we have the design ready to go. And depending on how the construction estimates look, we could bid those additional sewers as alternates with each bid package.
So if I understand what you're saying, let's say we think, phase whatever is going to cost $20 million, and adding the extra sewers is going to cost $2 million. If we got a bid for 18.5, you would bring it to the board and say, hey, they bid 18.5 and $1.8 million. We can get it all for 20. Do you want to go ahead and do it that way? Because we do that with roads now, where we'll get incremental paving if the bids come in low.
Right. And that would be taking advantage of, competitive bid environment. There's still a 20% contingency on all of these costs, so there's a little bit of cushion. That could go the other way, but there's an opportunity there as well to make up some, savings.
But what do you need from us tonight in terms, I feel like we should design this in. Does it matter if we design it in or not, or is it going to be designed in no matter what?
I'm sorry, Darren, I can
ahead.
take
Go
that
ahead.
one. There would be a small change order to your current contract for Phase 1, right, to add the additional sewers.
Correct,
It
to
would
add
be-
those additional sewers in.
But then for future phases, when we took the design contract to the board for approval, we would just build that in.
Right, so there isn't much, if any, incremental cost to design these sewers. And the decision of when to execute that's a future board's decision. As is all future capital spending is a future board's decision.
Right.
So do you need us to say, yes, design them in, or don't design them in, or do we need to say anything on that? Or are we designing them in to keep optionality.
I think to give us the most flexibility moving forward, to give us the go-ahead to design them would be a good direction for us to have, and that way, like I said, we could bid them as alternates in future boards, or future years. This board, though, will have the opportunity with future design contracts to know what's in there. So you will have an opportunity, future boards will have an opportunity to vote on that. All the direction that you're giving staff right now is to include in that scope of work these additional sewers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think that makes sense, because you basically preserve your flexibility and optionality. If you have them designed, you can, as opposed to saying, oh, we don't have them designed, so we can't do anything. We can't take advantage of a bid or something like that because we haven't got around to designing them.
Right.
And the incremental cost of designing in terms of engineer hours is not tremendous here.
No, I mean, whether we do it now or 2 years from now, we might as well do it now, again, to take advantage of good bid opportunities.
Right, actually, we probably have an advantage bidding it as part of a bigger package with the engineers as well, as opposed to saying, hey, I need you to design this little itty-bitty sewer piece here that we didn't design.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I have another question. I'm a little unclear on the status of, we're dealing with Park District property. And if we're all gung-ho on a deeper storage area, and that takes another 3 weeks of construction, which maybe the Park District doesn't like for whatever reason, because it has a bigger impact. How is that, is there meetings going on between staff of each as to where this is going, or can we just proceed?
You guys want to answer that one?
Well, no, there are ongoing staff meetings, and this is something that would have to be coordinated with the Park District, not just their staff, but their board as well, because to the extent that, if I can nuance some phraseology that was used, we're not talking about making basins as big as possible. We're talking about optimizing their size, but that is a larger footprint unless you want to go so deep, and then you'd need a pump station, which you don't want either. So if the object is to make the basins invisible on the property, which it is, amongst other things,
Yeah.
An extended construction schedule is going to have to be something that we're going to need to work out. Construction staging on the property, ingress, egress, where spoils go, everything else, what the disruption to programming is going to be. There's an awful lot for us to go through with both where we try to identify issues and see possible resolutions at a staff level, so that information can be brought to both the commissioners and to the trustees, so that people can make informed decisions. So there is a lot to be
Well,
done.
and can I paraphrase? This is another thing on a long list of things that have to be coordinated with the parks.
Yes.
So,
But I think Trustee Pierce is bringing up a good question and that I'm actually not clear on. At what point do we want to make, obviously, there's been lots of discussions you guys have had with the park board, and I think all of us should be incredibly excited by what we're talking about tonight. But at some point, we want to make sure we don't go too far with the design if we don't have the park board's approval to proceed on their property. And so I don't know where that is in this process, but don't they at some point make a board decision that, yes, they're okay with us proceeding with community playfields?
Well, both boards are going to have to come to an intergovernmental agreement, as was the case with West Park, and that will include everything from all the things we've talked about tonight, as well as insurance and liability and future maintenance, and what other improvements are appropriate to do in the park at the time. They will, for example, on the, just to pick one thing, on the south end of Playfield, where as we saw, there's existing stormwater issues now because it floods. What type of drainage structures are we going to have that's consistent with their desire to be able to, hopefully at the end, that's actually space they can program.
Yes.
So there's all kinds of things that are going to go into this, and it's going to be a very
I think Trustee Dodd's
complicated
question is what's the
undertaking.
timing?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm, is when do we see that intergovernmental agreement being made between the park board and our village board? And what do we need to do to get that agreement kind of rolling so that you can continue along with your design? I guess is kind of what I'm asking, so that we make sure that you're not also backpedaling on the design because of some, suggestions from the park board or whatever.
So Trustee Dodd, I think we're right on schedule. You'll see in year one there are no park projects contemplated in that first year. It's just storm sewer work in village right-of-way. So there's plenty of time for the village to get the project started and for the park district to proceed down whatever process they are comfortable with. And it's my understanding they're going to start that process shortly over the next few months as they work through each park one at a time. So I think we're right on schedule with that. I don't think the engineers are getting ahead of ourselves in any regard, and I'm not too concerned about that at this point.
Yeah.
So once the park district goes through their process, they'll come back to us and we'll work through an intergovernmental agreement or agreements, and then each board will review those in public meetings and approve them, and then we can move forward. So we're in good shape right now.
But I do think, look, the park board has a job to do, and they need to do it in a way that they're comfortable with. Now, obviously, we all serve the same residents, so, they, just as we're concerned about what we do to the parks, they're concerned about their same constituents and what happens on their property. But there's a process, and we need to let the park board run its process and get comfortable with what we're doing here. Again, it's not the first time we've done it. We did it with West Park, and it's not the first time. It's not like, staff and there are a number of park commissioners here tonight, and Steve Wilson, executive director, is here tonight, which thank you for coming. And so they're engaged and interested as well. But, to some extent, we have sort of our lane, which is what's it going to cost, what's its efficacy, and then they have their lane, which is, all right, what does this do to the parks, and how does that make us feel? And by the way, this is an opportunity for us. And so what kind of amenities and improvements can we make? And let's see what the community's concerns are, and let's see what the community wants in terms of amenities. So patience, I guess, is what I'm saying a little bit.
Well, and part of what we did tonight is important, too, because as we start to try and dig down, forgive the pun, get into more details on this, the actual scope of the work
Has to be defined
has
before
to
they
be
can.
defined,
Yeah.
and that's what we're in the process of doing tonight.
So let me ask a separate question, and I'm just trying to understand here a little
Yeah.
bit. Do we want to start construction year one on these relief sewers before we have the intergovernmental agreement between us and the park board? Because that is starting the build of the project. And so that's
Will this be part of the CIP in August? Is what's on there in year one scheduled to be part of the CIP?
Yes.
So that'll be when we sort of make those calls?
Yeah, that could be even earlier. It depends how we progress at this point.
We could be out to bid in fall for this, August or September. And hopefully by that time, we would have had the intergovernmental agreements established between now and then.
When you say out for bid, by phase or for the full thing?
No, just for the storm sewers that are in the right-of-way. The earliest we could put in any basin would be summer of 2020. Next year.
And
summer.
I have a question too regarding the phasing. Early on, when we were looking at alternative one, the whole relief sewer, we were saying, well, that's a huge project. And I think, Bridget, you had mentioned that there are certain sizes that are kind of a sweet spot for a good project to bid. If it's too small, it's not so great. If it's too big, it's too much. But this breakdown of the phases, does that put us in pretty much of a sweet spot for bidding these?
It does, yes.
Okay.
So if we weren't going to go to bid, if we were able to go to bid as early as September, that means we have 7 months to figure out an intergovernmental agreement without it causing any delay in the process.
Okay, so I think I might have been off a year. Maybe I misunderstood something. So year one is 2020. The first basin we'd build in year two is 2021.
No, year one is just storm sewers in our right-of-way that don't require any intergovernmental agreement, and we're in design right now. So the plan would be to go out to bid later this year in 19,
To go, and when would they be constructed?
through the late fall over the winter,
Of 2019?
19 into 20.
And so I think that's what I was asking, is they would be constructed, year one will be constructed before, potentially, if we're going to construct it in the fall, potentially before we have the intergovernmental agreement with the Park District. And that's what I'm asking.
Well, what I said was we have 7 months, if we're not going to go out to bid until September, so we wouldn't accept the bid until September, we have 7 months before that's a question that we have to worry about. It's a good question, because you're right, you don't want to get the cart in front of the horse here. You don't want to get going unless we have an agreement, but we've got 7 months to get there. So,
On the basins, I know basins are 2020, summer, but do we have to build them in the summer? I mean, Thornwood Park, could you build them? I mean, summer I understand for community playfield, just given the school, but Thornwood, and again, I know that's going to depend on when you're talking to the park board, but.
The basins, because there's excavation involved, the optimal summer months are the best time to be digging holes in the ground. But we could do it any time of the year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just more difficult to do it under, freeze-thaw conditions. Like we have.
After minus 50 degrees?
Yes,
Yeah.
wouldn't want to do it this past week.
Fall's not so bad around here either.
And anytime you risk inclement weather, it can cost more.
I understand.
okay, so all good questions. And Trustee Dodd, very good questions in terms of timing and coordination and all that. So, yeah. Other questions? So, I mean, let's, I guess the second question is, and I think we're in agreement, that we should design in, so that we have the flexibility and optionality, design in these optimized sewers as well. The decision on all of this funding is for future boards, but let's have it in place. I think that's what people are saying. Trustee Wolf, you agree with that?
Yeah.
Trustee Sullivan? Trustee Plunkett?
Yes.
Trustee Dodd? Trustee Kurzman? Okay. So I think, unanimously, we're in agreement with, first, community playfields, second, the future-proofing with the larger basins, and third, with designing the optimized, the extra storm sewers that would go into the optimized project.
Wonderful.
Is there other things that staff or Mr. Olson that you would like to share with us at this point? And are there other questions that the board have for staff or for our engineers? Thank you. That was a great presentation, and thank you for the work here at this. Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 4, which is public comment. So is there any member of the audience who would like to address us tonight? Okay. Next item on the agenda is item 5, which is other business, and I don't believe there's any other business tonight. So we'll move on to item 6, which is executive session. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn to an executive session to discuss the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, including whether a particular parcel should be acquired pursuant to Section 2, sub C, sub 5 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Are there any opposed?
You need a roll call, though, for that, I'm sorry.
For executive session?
Yes.
Okay.
If Jeff
Would the
was here,
clerk-
he'd tell you.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Gladly. Trustee Wolf.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Pierce.
Aye.
President Belinsky.
Aye. So the motion carries. We stand adjourned to executive session.